what's the science behind all of this? I'll connect it to an idea I've heard, which is that fear and anxiety can be received by the baby in the womb from the mother before birth. Take us in. What's important to know about that?
It trickles down that early. And I think even what's happening in terms of our body and the amygdala. So the amygdala, as you know, is the part of our brain that gets activated when we're anxious. And the amygdala is the fight or flight part of our brain. And it sends out the messages that our sympathetic nervous system is supposed to kick into gear, which is our alarm system of our body. And it changes the blood flow in our brain. It gets all these things happening through our nervous system that really act as an alarm. I mean, it motivates us to run faster, fight harder if we're fighting an actual enemy. It dilates our eyes so that we can see the enemy better, all these things. And so basically it revs up our body in a way that a child can even detect in the uterus. And the hard thing about the amygdala taking over is the more often the amygdala takes over, the more likely it is to take over. It actually enlarges and develops what's considered a hair trigger response. Yes. So that's part of where we want to be doing this work. I even encourage parents to do things like, and with kids too, deep breathing preventatively, even when you're not in an anxious moment, because I want us to get our amygdala shrunk back to the size that they don't have as much power, because the bigger they get, the more power they have in terms of our thinking.
Let's go to the other side of this. Let's talk about the uptick of the rate of anxiety, just in kids in particular. What's the culprit behind this stat? 1 in 4 kids struggling with anxiety today. What's your take on that?
I think there are a lot of culprits in terms of anxiety. I mean, one, obviously we could talk at length about perfectionism. Another we could talk about is just culturally. I think there is a trickle down of kids have never felt as much pressure from earlier ages. I mean, it's not, I feel like we were stressed about the SAT and the ACT. They're stressed now about the 5th grade test they have to do to get into middle school. I mean, it just starts earlier and earlier and earlier. And there is this drive for excellence that even when kids aren't the ones pushing, when parents aren't the ones pushing it, kids are absorbing it. And I think it's just too much for kids. And I think that's part of it. And also we could talk at length about parenting styles. And parents are very unintentionally contributing to the problem, as the 2 most common parenting strategies in light of anxiety are escape and avoidance. So pulling kids out of whatever it is they're afraid of. And as we're talking about the amygdala, the amazing thing is the way our brains are wired, they can actually grow. I mean, we can develop new neural pathways. It's neuroplasticity at any age. But the amygdala only develops new pathways. It only grows by experience. And so if they're never having to do hard things, they're not developing these new neural pathways that enable them to do hard things.
Wow. Okay. I want to go right to parenting styles, because I think you cracked the seal on this. This is super important. Which parenting styles are unintentionally contributing to anxiety in kids?
Well, in the book, I tried to narrow it down into the parents I see most often in my counseling office. And I talked about, obviously, the proverbial helicopter parent that's just hovering over constantly, where the child doesn't feel capable to go out on their own, which they need to be able to take healthy risks, because we're communicating that we believe in them when we allow them to do so. The snowplow parent, paving the road ahead of the child, making sure they're not going to hit any bumps, anything that might be difficult, require resilience, which we want them to be developing. Backhoe parents. So I'm not just paving the road in front of them. Here I'm cleaning up the mess after them, so they don't have to deal with any consequences themselves. I know a family where the father, who's a lawyer, called the cheerleading coach because their daughter didn't make cheerleading. That would be backhoe parenting. Also, sidecar parenting, which I don't think you're as old as I am, Christopher, but I used to watch the old school Adam West, Batman and Robin. When I was a kid, I loved it. And Batman always had Robin in the sidecar, and he was slinging around these corners, and Robin was going right alongside him. And I see a lot of parents who I think are taking their kids on a ride because they believe just because this is what I went through at my child's age, they must be too. My experience is their experience, when it's not necessarily that. You know, I went to summer camp when I was a kid, and it was horrible. I had a horrible experience. I'm terrified to send them, but I did because their dad really wanted them to go. And I just saw my first picture of my child, and their face looked unhappy. And, you know, that was exactly what I thought was going to happen. They're miserable. I think I need to consider going and picking them up, rather than they might have been distracted in that moment and just had a serious face. You know, I think that's probably sidecar parenting. And then parade float parenting is the idea that we're going to keep them happy at all times. And maybe they won't feel anxious or they won't feel sad if we can just keep them entertained and we can keep things fun. And in fact, unintentionally, we end up dismissing their feelings when we're doing that.
Yeah, I don't want to move too quickly ahead in the conversation, but I'm thinking about this already. I'm thinking about the title of your book, The Worry-Free Parent, and I see this opportunity we have. Becoming a worry-free parent sort of requires what? Because there has to be a transposition in the heart, a transformation in the heart to recognize, trust in the Lord with all my heart. I'm not going to lean upon my own understanding. I'm actually going to believe that the Father loves my kid more than I do. Now, that sounds really good and nice until real-life circumstances challenge the validity of that very truth. Talk to the parents listening right now who are saying, listen, Sissy, I get it. I want to believe that, but I can't get to sleep at night because this thing on my kid's body or this persistent thing that I keep thinking about won't leave me alone. What do I do? I just have great compassion for parents listening right now.
I know.
Who are saying, I'm exhausted, Sissy, help.
And, you know, I am talking to more parents, and I'm sure you are too.
I'm not even a parent, and I'm like choking up right now because
I know.
I feel for people who are hurting.
Yeah.
And there's so much happening right now in culture.
Yes.
In fact, we'll get there later in the conversation, but right around the block from you was a tragedy earlier this year. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But for the parent that's saying, I appreciate this as good information, but good information, more good information hasn't changed my life today. Where do I start, Sissy? Is this even possible?
You know, I think being worry-free is definitely something we move toward. And you're right. I think it feels like it won't go away. It feels like, I remember my mom saying it's a parent's job to worry. It feels, again, like we're protecting our kids.
Yeah.
We're doing what we have to do in this world today. And I think all I can say is sitting with kids and counseling them for 30 years, that hypervigilance, not intentionality. Intentionality is so important, but the hypervigilance ends up making them feel incapable, creating more dependent children rather than independent children, and spreading the anxiety that we so don't want for ourselves. And there has got to be a message of, you can do this, you're capable, even when it scares us, because they're not going to get to a place where they believe they're capable unless we're giving them that blessing. And when we're living out of our own anxiety and fear, and we're reacting and helping them escape and avoid, then we're not giving them the message that they're capable.